Dylan strides with heart, flames in her eyes, vision so sharp, cutting through lies. Graceful ballerina on world's heavy stage, igniting the truth, turning page after page. Unified fire, light in her veins, kick-starting the engine, breaking chains. Insight on high, she sees through the dark, pathway revealed, she leaves her mark.
Flame and brilliance, born from the spark. One heart ignited, roaring like a lark. Unified forces making shadows depart. Jen leads us in this grand art.
Her wisdom's a torch, eyes set on the goal. Destiny written deep in her soul. Fire and light, merging so tight. Powers combined to illuminate night. Jen's grace, lifting vision so high. Seeing the world through an eagle's eye. Heartbeats sinking like drums in the fight. Unified essence burning so bright.
Oh, flame and brilliance, born from the spark. One heart ignited, roaring like a lark. Unified forces making shadows depart. Jen leads us in this grand art. Jen leads us, and born from the
I think the most that I can do with my circumstances is spread enough awareness to people to advocate for themselves and not to give up when doctors don't listen. A 32-year-old from Edmonton, Alberta, that was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma after years of her symptoms being misattributed to eczema. 61-year-old cancer patient in Dublin faced a 6-month delay in starting chemotherapy due to systemic healthcare issues. And she expressed having to fight to get treatment started is just cruel. Jonathan Gluck was diagnosed with multiple myeloma and given less than 3 years to live, and he shared in his memoir, "Science Saved Me." Historical perspectives and resistance to medical advancements, right? Cotton Mather, a Puritan minister in the 18th century, advocated for smallpox inoculation during a time of widespread skepticism. Facing public outrage, including a grenade thrown into his home, and he maintained, whether a Christian may not employ this medicine and humbly give thanks to God, good providence in discovering of it to a miserable world. Wikipedia.org. J. Marion Sims, known as the father of modern gynecology, faced opposition when advocating for cancer treatment in women after being forced to resign from the Women's Hospital for his stance, because he played a pivotal role in establishing America's first cancer institute, the New York Cancer Hospital. Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn, a pediatrician and critic of medical overreach, cautioned against blind trust in medical authority. One of the unwritten rules in modern medicine is always to write a prescription for a new drug quickly before all its side effects have come to the surface. Wikipedia.org. This care was life-saving, but we didn't know it was until it was gone. Sarah, mother of a 17-year-old trans girl in a state with a ban in place April 8th, 2024. Understand that passing this bill is without exaggeration a death sentence for kids who depend on gender affirming care for their health and safety. The blood of those kids will be on your hands, and you can prevent it. Michael McLaurin, who spoke with his wife, Michelle, about their experience raising their trans daughter. I am transgender. I was born and raised in Ohio, and I have received gender affirming care, medical care related to my transition for 7 years now in Ohio. Stevie Beck, whose mother testified at the May 19th meeting that nobody is born in the wrong body and that she had never met a trans person before. The hope that this bill does not pass is what is keeping me alive. Passing this bill would forever change my life in a way that is detrimental to me and so many others. Cass Steiner, a 15-year-old trailblazing homecoming princess. I have not been fooled. I have not been groomed. I know who my child is. I know the studies. I know the risks. I know the benefits. And I, the parent, will make the choice. Giles Roblier, parent of a trans child. All of these testimonies were in the U.S. Congress. Ancient and historical perspectives are that Roman emperor from 218 to 222 AD, call me not Lord, for I am a lady. Attributed to Alcibiades as recorded by Cassius Dio and Time.com. Rabbinic Midrash, circa 5th century CE, the first human being was an androgynous, both male and female at the same time. Interpretation from ancient Jewish texts on the creation of humanity, them.us. Thomas Beatty, British legal scholar, early 20th century. From my earliest years, I hated sex. The reason was that I wanted to be a girl. Personal reflections published posthumously. Wikipedia.org. Marion Khatun Mokhari, an Iranian transgender activist. I am a woman. I am a woman! Exclamation during a pivotal meeting leading to the issuance of a fatwa permitting gender affirming surgery in Iran. Wikipedia.org. Christine Jorgensen, American trans pioneer in the 1950s. Nature made a mistake, which I have corrected. Reflecting on her transition and gender affirming surgery. ThriveWorks.com. Isis King, model and activist, mentally and everything else. I was born female. Discussing her gender identity and experience. Wikipedia.org. Contemporary reflections, Laverne Cox, actress and advocate. I've never been interested in being invisible and erased. Emphasizing the importance of visibility for transgender individuals, thriveworks.com. Elliot Page, actor and producer. I can't begin to express how remarkable it feels to finally love who I am enough to pursue my authentic self. On embracing his gender identity, thriveworks.com. Jazz Jennings, activist and television personality. Being transgender is not a medical transition. It's about discovering who you are, living your life authentically, and loving yourself. Sharing her perspective on the transgender experience, thriveworks.com. Leela Alcorn, transgender teenager, 2014. I felt like a girl trapped in a boy's body, from her poignant suicide note, highlighting the struggles faced by transgender youth. Wikipedia.org. I am sorry that you have to see me this way. I will be your angel. Amy Sue Carney, August 6th, 2011. That was the note I left for my coworkers, my friends, the paramedics and firefighters who would hear the dispatch tones and respond, only to find me, a colleague, the caller. It was cruel, I know. a Scorpio through and through, my exit was dramatic. I didn't mean to ruin their sleep, though. It was, after all, 4:20 a.m. 13 years earlier. The first day of paramedic school, she walked in wearing a crisp black EMS uniform, shiny new shoes, and her trauma shears clipped backwards. An obvious rookie. At 5'2", she wasn't exactly an intimidating figure, but I knew that she could hold her own. During an initial assessment, the fire captain announced, "Ladies, you're not required to do as many pull-ups as the men." Without hesitation, she shot back, "Do I look helpless to you?" Jumped up to the bar and did 5 more than were required. It was at that exact moment I discovered 2 things. Spraying Dr. Pepper from your nose burns like hell. And she was like, unlike anyone I'd ever met. That was how Amy always told the story of how we met, followed by her favorite part. The year she relentlessly invited me to camping trips, parties, dinners, and anything else that she could think of, only for me to tell her no. I was a single mom of a 3-year-old driving 150 miles round trip to be at school, and accomplishing this goal meant no distractions. I had tunnel vision. She never seemed to mind, though. Every time I turned her down, she'd just laugh it off and try again. It was 2 weeks before we graduated, a Friday, and normally that meant she'd ask me to go camping, her go-to suggestion, which I always turned down. But this time was different. "We should go to Station 4, she said, leaning casually against the classroom table like it wasn't a big deal. Station 4, a gay nightclub in Dallas, Texas. She motioned towards our classmates, the small but mighty group of LGBTQ folk who had managed to find each other in a sea of 30 recruits. Then she pointed to Rhonda, who was cisgender and seemingly terrified of everything. And Rhonda gave an awkward wave, like she wasn't entirely sure what she'd agreed to, but knew it was safer than saying no. We were the only femmes in the class, she and I, 2 women navigating a world dominated by men, where rookie was practically tattooed on our foreheads and every misstep felt amplified. Amy was fearless, though. She'd call out anyone who underestimated her or made assumptions. She had this way of owning space without apology when she was in uniform. I kept my head down and focused on my work, but that day something had shifted. I didn't have Erin that weekend, and for the first time, I realized I was going to say yes without asking her to ask me again. The thought of graduating never seeing her again had been gnawing at me for weeks, creeping in during long drives home or when I caught myself laughing at something she'd said. The idea of losing her felt heavier than I was willing to admit, even to myself. So when she grinned and said, "Come on, it'll be fun," I nodded. And so I said yes to Station 4. The truth was, I had no idea what I was walking into. I'd never been to a gay club before, never seen a real drag queen in person, and if I'm being honest, I'd never been with a woman either. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, my nerves were doing gymnastics. The bass from inside the club seemed to pulse through the asphalt, vibrating up through my shiny, still too new shoes. She parked the car and turned to me with that signature grin of hers, the one that was equal parts mischief and charm. "You ready?" she said, her tone light, but her eyes searching. "Hell yes," I lied, which was probably unnecessary because I'm sure she could hear my heartbeat pounding. Inside, it was like stepping into another world. The music was loud and the air was thick with energy and glitter, and everywhere I looked, there were people unapologetically themselves. I was used to uniforms, structure, and expectations, but this, this was freedom. And then I saw them, drag queens, real life, towering works of art, strutting through the club in 6-inch heels that I wouldn't have dared attempted even on my best day. And one of them winked right at me as she passed, and I felt my face flush. And Amy leaned in close, her voice barely cutting through the music. You look like you've seen a ghost. No, I said, trying to sound calm. Just a fabulous giant. She laughed, and I couldn't help but join her. It wasn't just the drag queens that were larger than life, it was everything. The music, the lights, the way people danced like they were untouchable. For someone who'd spent so much of her life keeping her head down, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. And then there was her. She grabbed my hand and led me onto the dance floor without asking, without hesitation. Her confidence was magnetic. I was stiff at first, awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot, but she didn't let go. Relax, she said, her face close to mine. No one here is judging you. I looked at her, bathed in the neon glow of club lights, and for the first time, I let myself believe it. She didn't just lead me onto the dance floor, she pulled me into her orbit. The crowd was a blur of sequins and sweat and joy, and the music's bass thumped so hard it felt like it was rewiring my heartbeat. Amy was already moving, like the music was just a continuation of her pulse. She didn't do that awkward side-to-side sway most people resort to when they don't know what to do with their limbs. No. She danced like she owned the place. I, on the other hand, was all elbows and nerves. She laughed when I tried to mimic her, spinning me around before I could protest. You dance like you're dodging bullets, she teased, but there was no malice in it. You know, maybe I am, I shot back, though I was smiling. She leaned in close, and the scent of her cologne cutting through the chaos around us. Nobody's aiming at you, rookie. I don't know if it was the music, the flashing lights, or the fact that her hand stayed firmly on mine the entire time, but for once, I stopped overthinking. She let go of my hand and threw her arms in the air, daring me to follow her lead, and for some reason, maybe because she made it seem so easy, I did. I don't know how long we danced, but eventually I wasn't trying anymore. I was just moving, laughing, and letting go in a way that I had never in my life done before. The highlight of the night was when a drag queen tall enough to block out half the strobe lights sauntered over to us, and she wore a sequin gown that sparkled like a disco ball and had a blonde wig so voluminous it probably required its own zip code. Oh, honey, she purred, looking me up and down. Who let this snack into my house without a proper welcome? Amy burst out laughing as the queen took my hand, trolled me around, and dipped me like we were on the set of Dancing with the Stars. And I squealed, not entirely sure if I was more embarrassed or delighted, and Amy was doubled over by the time the queen helped me back up. You're precious, she said, patting my cheek before disappearing back into the crowd like some kind of glittery fairy godmother. She's right, Amy said, grinning. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't help but notice the way she was looking at me. Like maybe, just maybe, she saw something in me I hadn't yet learned to see in myself. By the time the night ended, my cheeks hurt from smiling, my feet were sore from dancing, and my whole world felt a little bit bigger. Little did I know that in just a couple of weeks, we'd practically be loading a U-Haul with both our names on it, fulfilling that tongue-in-cheek U-Haul lesbian trope before I even realized what it meant. For the uninitiated, that's playful stereotype in the LGBTQ plus community where people joke that lesbians move in together on the second date. Of course, it's more of an affectionate cultural in joke than a universal truth, but in our case, we leaned right into it without even trying. What I didn't realize at the time was just how hard she fought to make that night happen. Amy was terrified of drag queens, genuinely, but her determination to show me a new, more colorful world overshadowed her fear. She wanted me to see that we had every right to dance, to explore, and to love openly, even if the reality of our situation was still complicated. For a lot of us, it still wasn't entirely safe to be seen as anything more than friends, roommates, or coworkers. The scars of past decades lingered from Stonewall in 1969, where people first stood up and said enough to the AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s, which brought both devastating, loss and fierce sense of unity to our community. Yes, over the years, we'd won some battles. More visibility, better legal protections, even the legislation of same sex marriage in many places, but the world was still a place where we had to look over our shoulders if we dared to hold hands in the wrong neighborhood, or if we let our eyes linger too long on each other in the grocery store. Amy knew that all too well, which is why public displays of affection were largely off limits. But that night at Station 4, surrounded by glitter and music, we forgot to be scared. We danced until closing time, and for a few blissful hours, it felt like the rest of the world couldn't touch us. When we finally stumbled back onto the sidewalk, panting and laughing under the buzzing neon sign, I realized I'd never seen her look happier. Despite her own anxieties, she had carried me over the threshold of an entirely new life, and a piece of my heart knew I wouldn't be looking back. A couple of weeks later, we were loading boxes, like an inside joke coming to life, proving that sometimes the stereotypes might just have a grain of truth in them after all. And I, for one, was perfectly okay with that, as my engagement ring sparkled in the sunlight. Aaron was 3 years old, a ball of endless energy and sharp wit even back then. The first time he met Amy, we took him bowling. She tried to look serious as she lined up her shot, but the ball went straight into the gutter, and without missing a beat, Aaron formed an L on his forehead and yelled, "Loser!" Timed so perfectly, it caught us all off guard, and I burst out laughing, and Amy doubled over, and Aaron grinned from ear to ear. And in that moment, the two of them clicked like puzzle pieces, and for a second, I forgot all about how new their relationship was. It felt like they'd been best buddies all along. Time seemed to accelerate from there. Fast forward flashes of life's chaos and surprises. I remember the robotic raptor I was so sure Aaron would love, watching him chase it around the living room until we were all breathless from laughter. Then came the day Amy and I watched him strum his very first guitar, a bright blue diamond Dimebag Darrell edition we sometimes jokingly called Denise. It sounded incredible, and Aaron, never one to do things half-heartedly, plucked out a few awkward chords with the determination of a future rock star. Next were the WWE tickets in Dallas, because of course he loved the larger-than-life theatrics. And after that, there was a humble little cot he slept on when we uprooted everything to move to Oklahoma. The one that we brought home after Hurricane Katrina turned the Gulf Coast inside out. We spent almost 3 weeks driving back and forth. First for 2 brutal weeks, helping recover bodies, and then returning repeatedly to support relief efforts. And through it all, we somehow found time to coordinate, and she found time to coordinate one of the biggest surprises of my life, picking Aaron up on the sly and delivering him to me when I least expected it, flashing that triumphant grin of hers the whole time. She was always good at that, making you feel like the most important person in the room with just one grand gesture, or sometimes a simple quiet one. Something's not right, guys. We need to go down there and make sure they're okay. Kaylee had tried to call a few minutes earlier, but as usual, the cell signal inside that old trailer was too weak, and I had a knot in the pit of my stomach that refused to go away. And just as I was trying to brush off my worries, Sarah burst through the door. Her cheeks were bright red, and she was panting like she'd sprinted the entire way. "Aaron got caught on a hook," she managed to say. I stared at her, not comprehending. "What do you mean he got caught on a hook?" "He jumped off the dock and now he's stuck and he can't move." That was all Amy, Cindy, and I needed to hear. We grabbed whatever tools we thought might help, needle nose pliers, random supplies from the neighbors, and piled into the car. The drive was a blur. We skidded to a stop at the dock and leapt out before the engine even cut off. There he was at the far end of the dock, barely able to keep his head above the waves. Exhaustion radiated from him. He was fighting so hard not to go under. My heart lurched as Amy and I sprinted down the wooden boards in about 30 seconds flat. And by second 31, Amy was already in the water. She swam around him, her arms sweeping under the surface, trying to feel what had him stuck. But when she came up for air, she shook her head. "I don't feel anything," she shouted to Aaron. "Buddy, are you sure something's hooked on you?" Aaron groaned, tears mixing with the lake water. I can't move." And in a flash, both Amy and I realized what was really happening, though we didn't say it out loud. "Okay," Amy said gently. "I'm going to lean you back so I can see better. If it hurts, tell me." And she eased him onto his back, and that's when we saw the swollen, angry marks on his arm. He hadn't been snagged on a hook. He'd been bitten by a snake. The venom must have paralyzed his arm. No wonder he felt like he couldn't move. Working together, we half lifted, half floated him to the nearest ladder and hoisted him onto the dock. I dove back in and swam to shore as fast as I could, yelling for Cindy to call 911. Aaron's father, a paramedic, was on duty that day. We knew we'd need a helicopter transport to Dallas for treatment. By the time I made it back to the end of the dock, Aaron's eyes were glazed over. He was trembling, on the verge of a seizure, and I knelt beside him, brushing the wet hair off of his forehead. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, fighting back panic. And he met my gaze, and his voice shook. "I know, Mommy. Nanny told me it would be." And my heart sank. Nanny, his grandmother, had passed away a couple of years before. Hearing him say that felt like stepping into another world. The helicopter touched down in a roar of wind and noise, and I rode in the front. I couldn't see Aaron, but at least I was with him. Amy and Charles stayed behind, forced to wait for a ride to the hospital. Hours passed before Amy finally arrived. She'd had to scramble for a friend to drive her all the way there. And even though we kept her updated on Aaron's improving condition, she'd never truly forgave herself for not being right beside him in the helicopter. It weighed on her for a long time, and I understood why. But in the end, Aaron pulled through. But that day remains burned into my memory, a stark reminder of how quickly life can veer into chaos. Thought for a few seconds. Below is Chaos always seemed to simmer beneath the surface. I did my best to shield Aaron from it, but when you're constantly walking on eggshells, it's hard for a kid not to notice. 5 years before it all fell apart, Amy's mother had passed away, and she never truly found a way to navigate that grief. In the time that followed, she threw herself into her work, deploying to Hurricane Katrina relief, tackling grim emergency calls, anything to stay in motion. And meanwhile, I'd been diagnosed with lupus and wasn't able to work, which just added another layer of stress. It was about a year after the day on the dock when the unthinkable happened. We lost Amy to suicide. A terrible travesty that stole her laughter, her surprises, the spontaneous guitar solos, all those little things that made her who she was. Aaron was only 14, 2 weeks shy of starting high school, when he dressed in a white suit and helped me carry her casket. He even led the funeral procession on her motorcycle, an image forever seared into my memory. The devastation was only compounded the day that the police released her final letter. She didn't even mention me. His eyes were red and hurt, and my heart hurt so badly. She had barely mentioned me, except to say that I was frightened of her for what she'd done, and the rest was aimed at her EMS family. Apologies and promises to the friends and colleagues she'd adored. In their eyes, she would be forever immortalized as a paragod. But that's another story for another time. A story of heartbreak, of consequences, of love and loss, and of a woman who gave so much of herself that she just couldn't anymore. Amid all the love, laughter, and profound connections that threaded our lives together, Amy's story is a somber reminder that mental health struggles can live hidden beneath even the brightest smiles. It underscores the importance of reaching out to friends, to families, to professionals before the weight becomes too great to bear alone. Honest communication can be the lifeline that prevents a moment of despair from becoming an irreversible tragedy. And the professional support, whether through counseling, therapy, or crisis hotlines, can bridge the gap when personal efforts and community care are not enough. Above all, it is crucial to remember that you do not have to fight your battles on your own. Help is always out there, waiting for you to take the courageous step of saying, I need someone to listen. Till the last rose dies. This was my chapter in the anthology Phoenix of Resilience, Rising from the Ashes of Adversity, presented by Crystal Phoenix. Hello, Indigo, and thank you so much. Thank you so much, Leslie. Hello, beautiful Sharon. I mentioned my son wearing white and helping me to carry Amy's casket, and that was true at her funeral. Because the year was 2011 in the state of Texas, USA, and marriage wasn't legal. And so we never had the privilege of getting legally married. So since she never walked me down the aisle, I walked her down her final aisle. And we both were white, my son and I. And this was despite the fact that when Amy took her life, it was at the end of a 72-hour kidnapping of myself, where she also tried to take my own life. "13 years into our relationship. On August 6th of this year, that will have been 14 years ago. Some years later, gay marriage was passed in Texas, only actually about 7 years ago, maybe 10 tops. And I remember hearing things like this from my friends at the time, right? My very best friend in the world argued that she wanted me to have the legalities so long as it wasn't using the word marriage, as she voted for George Bush, who was against LGBTQ marriage. Cisgender in the United States, after 12 years, have the right to draw against their spouse's Social Security. That was something that I did not have the right to, though we had been married for 13 years. And you might say to yourself, but it's legal now, and you're married now. And I am remarried. However, welcome in, Aaron. Thank you so much for being here, my handsome friend. There are over 250 bills in Congress in the states of the United States right now. 159 of them are anti-trans bills, ranging anything and everything from affirming care to restroom use, just being able to be present, with threats of ICE being given the go-ahead to remove known trans to prisons in other countries and or for removal to an island. $129 of those bills are in the state of Texas, where I live, where I am not trans. I am non-binary, which, by the way, is coupled right together with trans. And I will gladly be coupled with trans and face the same fate, because there is no difference or no separation in my world between me and any other human. $129 bills. As a paramedic firefighter, I ran on children that had taken their own lives. The youngest among them, 6. And every single one of them was a trans youth whose parent, whose school, whose classmates didn't understand and dismissed them, bullied them, threatened them. It starts with one group of people. Like it started with immigrants in our country several months ago. There's no one that's safe in a dictatorship. Six years ago, as I mentioned in the book, right? So 13 years ago, that I was already very sick. I'd already had to stop working as a paramedic and a firefighter due to illness, due to SEL lupus, right? It's where that began for me. And now, even just last 2 weeks ago, I got diagnosed with two brand new autoimmunes. So I'm up to 9 now. Crohn's, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and 6 more. Six years ago, I was dying. 6 years ago, I married legally. I was able to have insurance for the first time in my life. And I am living because of that. One of the bills, even nationally, scheduled to go before the Supreme Court is the legalization of gay marriage. So you see, this is something that could be removed from me all over again. That I would lose the ability, that I would be in a marriage that would be considered illegal, that I would lose my insurance, that I would lose my team of doctors, that I would lose my medications. Just like the trans youth that I read from earlier that said, this bill passing kills me. These bills passing would kill me. And we all know someone that's affected very directly in this way. And the truth of the matter is, we are all affected by these bills. Key facts to understand is that gay marriage protections are actively under threat and they have been removed in several states. Trans youth healthcare is already banned in multiple states. Books about LGBTQ plus lives are being removed from schools and libraries. Mentions of gender identity is criminalized in classrooms. Bathroom bans, drag bans, and family separation bills are already being introduced, and children that have been successfully adopted that are living wonderful lives with their gay or trans families are being ripped out of their homes and thrown back into the care of the states. It is illegal in several states for a doctor to refuse care. I'm sorry. It is now legal for doctors in certain states to refuse care based on their beliefs. This really isn't about queerness. It's about control. And if they can erase them and me, they can erase you. Right, first they come for the drag queens. then the artists, the misfits, the parents, the teachers, the lovers, the dreamers, the free. And it feels like this can't happen. It feels like we're in a dream or the twilight zone. Like, what in the hell is happening? That's what it feels like. And then there are those in the world that I think of every single day that still have never even known the joy of being able to be freely who they are. Because there are countries that is far worse, far more dangerous. In some parts of the world, you can legally be set on fire, alive, beheaded, shot down, beat to death, stoned to death. You know, I don't leave you all in a place of despair, but a place of hope and a place of the ability to take action. So, one of the things that you're going to see on the end of this, my outro today, is some of the same information that I'm fixing to share right now. And the reason I'm saying that is that you can come back on a replay and pause my outro and write the information down for yourself. Because we've seen what's possible without these bills. We've danced under glitter. We've raised our kids. We've built businesses. We've started revolutions. We've healed old scars. We are the proof that freedom works, and we won't go quietly. But your voice matters. Your voice matters. Your story, if you're brave enough to share it, could save a life. And if you're brave enough to step in advocacy, you can also save a life. So I want to share some resources with you all. This is a clean, powerful resource list that allows any of us to be human rights advocates, to offer sanctuary, to step into action for solidarity for all, especially queer, trans, disabled, or multiply marginalized folks, right? So crisis support lines in the U.S. and globally are the Trevor Project for LGBTQ youth in the U.S., the Trevor Project.org, NAMI, N-A-M-I, Mental Health Helpline 6264, or NAMI.org/help. Trans Lifeline, U.S. and Canada, peer-led, is translifeline.org. The numbers are listed also. International LGBTQ plus helpline map is curated by ILGA World, and it can be found on ilga.org. Countries and U.S. states that are safer and more affirming include California, Colorado, New York, Washington, Oregon, Illinois, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Mexico, Minnesota, and New Jersey. These states offer protections for trans youth, access to gender-affirming care, and inclusive public accommodations. That is 11 states out of 50. All other states have trans bills, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ bills on their dockets. Countries that are safer for LGBTQI in 2025 are Canada, New Zealand, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Iceland, and Malta. Canada, Portugal, and New Zealand are particularly supportive of asylum and queer families. Where to donate? Trans and queer specific are Trans Justice Funding Project. Then there is Black and Pink, LGBTQ and people in prison. There is GLITS, GLITS, for trans sex worker housing and advocacy in New York City. For the Girls, Rent and Gender Affirming Surgery funded for Black trans people. Broad advocacy and policy is ACLU, LGBTQ plus rights projects. Lambda legal defense for LGBTQ with regards to civil rights. And Outright International in regards to global LGBTQ human rights. Youth and Mental Health is the Trevor Project, and Q Chat Space, which is live chat for LGBTQ teens. How to get involved? Volunteer with local mutual aid or LGBTQ centers. Just simply search LGBTQ Center near me. Host screenings of queer documentaries or read-ins of banned books. Join or support trans-led organizing groups in your state or country. Follow and amplify trans journalists, activists, and artists. Run for local office. Support school board candidates protecting LGBTQ youth. Share resources like this one and tag it with hashtag 72 hours or hashtag Enjen to H.E.A.R.T. On my page, on my LinkedIn page, there is a PDF that I placed yesterday with all of the gender affirming identities to educate yourself. You may also reach out to me and ask me any questions at all about anything. One thing that I have not spoke about a lot with and about Amy's life was that she was what would be considered non-binary and or a boy. When she was 13 years old, her parents drove her out into the middle of a field. And they asked her if she was gay. And she told them yes. And they told her to remove herself from the car, where they also got out of the car, popped the trunk open, removed a suitcase and a brown paper bag that had one sandwich, and they left her there. Scenes like that are more than common. Even myself, when I was a 21-year-old, 19, sorry. My twin brother is gay. I always knew he was from the moment that I knew that there was something special and different about him for as long as I can remember. And I didn't know what that was. But then we learned what that was, right? He was gay. And I didn't know that I was. I didn't know that I was. And then so after that 2 weeks, right? That 2 weeks, we got the U-Haul, we moved in together, we got engaged. I immediately called my brother, even before that happened, right? I call him. He's working at a gas station in Amarillo. He's about 6 hours away from me. I'm so excited. He's so excited that he yells and starts celebrating, right? My sister just came out, because he knew about me and I didn't, right? And so he had already done so much of the hard work as far as the family was concerned. And so I didn't think that it was a thing. I didn't think it was going to be a thing at all, mistakenly. And I took Amy to the family Thanksgiving. And my mom looked me in the eyes. And my mom is a relationship that was very strained at the time, very strained. And my mom had done a lot of things to me in my life, but nothing affected me when she looked me in the eye and said to me, I'm disappointed in you. And then we were 14 years old. I was 14 years old. My brother was 14. He'd been suspended for getting in fights. I had been suspended. I had gotten in trouble because I was his protector. I was constantly getting in a fight with the boys that were trying to beat my brother. When I was 14, I went to my grandmother's home that she grew up in. I stayed the night. We stayed the night. I've always had an ability to see through the veil, if you will. So I was very surprised to have a visitor that was no longer alive in the room that I was sleeping in my grandmother's childhood home. And come to find out that her own brother had been gay, and he had moved to San Francisco in the 70s, and he had contracted AIDS, and he had come back home to die in that room. So even with all the hurt that was currently going on between my brother and I, getting in trouble, and my brother relentlessly being bullied, it was the family's secret. Nobody wanted to talk about it or say that, yes, you're not the only ones. Even though it could have and would have made things so much easier for my brother. So if you have a story like that, if you have family secrets of any kind around things like that, I encourage you to talk about things, speak about things, stand up for what it is that you believe in. Sometimes times, desperate times, call for great courage. And asking that for that courage could mean being punished. It could mean a lot of things. Because being an advocate, being a human rights activist and a civil rights activist is not something that's favored right now. But know that you're not alone. Know that you can, and know that any and every time that you do, it will save a life. Thank you all so much for being with me here today, for your presence. Hi, Kenneth. Welcome in, and welcome, Nancy Deborah Barrows. It's so wonderful to see you. So wonderful to see and have all of you here. Thank you so much. No matter what, there is always hope, and you're it. Your presence, your voice, your listening, your tasting, your standing, your being, your existing, all of those things are it. We are the systems. So let's continue to work together, be collaborative, and create the best ones that we can. Thank you all so much. I'll see you around.